Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today I'm joined by Garry Honey, who's an author, educator and speaker around the topic of governance, compliance and risk. Garry and I talk all around those topics from the perspective of a board and what does a board need to do to get risk right. What is risk blindness and how is that a problem? What are the three areas that boards need to work on to improve the outcomes they get in terms of risk and to protect and preserve their reputations? I'm sure you'll get a lot from this discussion. It's certainly got me thinking, and it's given me lots of topics to ponder on over the days and weeks to come. So hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it and join my conversation with Garry.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Garry.
Thank you for having me.
It's good. I'm looking forward to talking a bit more broadly, not about sort of safety risk or even financial risk, but some of the kind of non-financial costs and risks to different organisations. And you, I think on your website, you set out some of these points that, private, public, professional organisations have different non-financial costs attributed to risk. Do you want to start by just setting out what some of these risks and costs are to people?
I think it's important that people realise that I'm what they call sort of industry sector agnostic. In other words, I cover every possible one. And risk means different things to different people. When you go back to the analysing what the word came from, the Italian word from to dare, and a lot of people who I come across in risk management think about controls and compliance and stopping things and avoiding risk. Whereas actually, of course, the word comes from to dare. And of course, a lot of private sector businesses have got to make money and profit. And if they don't take risk, they don't grow.
Correct.
So I know it's axiomatic to say, risk is both an opportunity and a threat. But of course, 80% of people out there see risk as a threat and treat it as a threat. I'm not pushing the opportunity side particularly, but what I do tend to do is when I do a talk at a business school and I've got a wide audience, I sort of say, well, here are three examples of ways people see risk, and if I've got a moment, I could just go into that.
Yeah.
In the public sector, where you're dealing with pupils or patients or passengers, to use the alliteration, it's about safety, public safety and duty of care. So risk is injury and stopping an injury. That's pretty obvious in public sector. Once you move into medical, it's different again, because surgeons have to decide tricky decisions, to intervene or not intervene. What is the risk of a particular operation? What is the risk if we don't do it? So risk is about choice.
Yeah.
And the area I do most work in is finance and the city, where you have insurers, hedge funds, investment managers, people for whom it's not about risk is not about pain. It's usually about some form of loss, or actually a lot of the courses I've been on where risk is gain, is looking for the maximum gain from an investment. So risk in financial services is actually about balance of how much do I put at risk here, I'm investing here, and what is the maximum gain from it. So there are three different scenarios there of public sector, medical and finance. Of two or three are there. There are probably others. I mean, in the safety area, there are a huge amount of different things, depending on whether you're primary, extractive, oil, gas, coal, which is high danger. And of course, secondary, which is industry, manufacturing. Heavy industry is more dangerous than light industry. And service industries is different again. I mean, I've worked behind a bar, and you mustn't trip over a wire. They all have different risks, but I must say that the compliance and control side is so well documented and so well structured. I tend not to go there. What I tend to look at is decision risk for boards and where they perhaps don't see a risk, but we'll come on to that in a minute.
Yeah, because you talk about sort of three levels, don't you? There's the the kind of governance essentials, board effectiveness, and then kind of board confidence, I think is the way you talk about it. Do you want to just explain sort of what those steps are and kind of, at a high level?
Yeah, at a high level. I mean, when you're designing, if you're a business school or a training or coaching agency or some sort of top level advisor to a board, you've got to give them the governance basics. What the jurisdiction requires you to do, what the regulators require, what your liabilities are, what financial requirements are, what being a director is about, and there are courses on that. The other thing, of course, there is what we call board development, which is leadership and team building and personal skills and inspiring people, etc., etc.
Yeah.
The bit I do, which is the third bit, which is where you look at the future, which is how you actually manage uncertainty. A lot of boards don't like to spend too much time talking about the future. They should do. That's what their strategy is about. But because there are no easy answers, there are no clear answers, because you're talking about uncertain, unknown future, that kind of risk of the unknown is sort of not really spending enough time in the boardroom. So what I try and get boards to do is think about how they manage uncertainty. And there are various tools for doing that. You've heard of things like scenario planning and horizon scanning and all sorts of other tools. But boards often don't do that. They might do it once a year at an away day with a third party moderator, but by and large, they don't do that well enough. And of course, coming out of that, two other things that I look at apart from how they look at the future. One, how they relate to stakeholders. And that ultimately affects reputation, how many stakeholders they've got, how they relate to them. And how they communicate risk. Because when you talk risk to somebody, you have to think, what do they want to do with this information? Are they supposed to be reassured that I can do something about it? Or are they supposed to be running scared? When you shout fire, what do you want someone to do? Leap through the window or run down the stairs? What do you want them to do?
Interesting. Yeah, that word fire is definitely one that perks people's ears up, isn't it? I think they train people to, if people are worried about being abducted or something, they teach people to shout fire, because that gets people, rather than saying help, because that sort of seems to get people paying more attention. So interesting.
Well, I know that normally when I speak at a conference, if I don't, the person introducing me has to go through all where the fire exits are and everything, escape routes, and I understand that. I mean, the reason I mentioned, you can fit this in somewhere, but the work I've been doing for the last 8 to 10 years, based on a program I designed and ran at Henley, on what boards need to know about risk. And that's built on 3 pillars. The first part is identifying a risk. And that I see is something that boards don't spend enough time on. The second part is managing it. And that's generally quite good. Most boards know how to manage risk, or most companies know how to manage risk. The third part is communicating it. And this is where I see there are opportunities to be better. The identification and the communication are the 2 things I think boards need more time on.
Yeah.
The management of risk as a function, as a control function, is usually pretty well sorted. But actually how you identify risk at a board level and how you communicate it to shareholders and employees and suppliers and all sorts of other people, investors, very important. Because what do you want them to do? And I remember years ago, stop me if I'm going on too fast, but when I first started working as a trainer, I used to run a program on, at the end of my talk, what do I want my audience to do? What action are they going to take? And when you say, I'm going to tell you a risk, this is why I said fire, what do you want your audience to do? And that I think sometimes a lot of people say, well, I've put it on the register. I put it on the map. I'm not going to look at it again. I've done it. What are you meant to do with it?
Yeah, these things are living and breathing, aren't they? And interestingly, the more I explore these topics of safety and risk, the more that it comes back to that communication point, actually, and you've got to be clear and credible and have clarity of what you're saying, to get people to, because you're right, it's what do you want people to do with this information? You know, do you want people just to sit in their hands, or do you want people to act or change the way they act, or and if you're not clear, then they're just simply not going to do what you want them to do.
I mean, that's true. I mean, if I can just explain, one of the things I do talking about governance is how important appetite and tolerance are. You know, we have a risk tolerance, and of course they're totally circumstance dependent. And are they reviewed enough? A little thing I do in talks I say, imagine you're standing on a wall that's about 7 or 8 feet high, and you're a middle-aged man or woman. Do you jump off? And the chances are you might break an arm or leg or fracture something, and you don't jump. If you're sort of 20 years old and athletic, you probably jump. The problem, so there's age and wisdom and all sorts of other issues there. So your risk appetite it's a risk I've considered, but I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden there's a fire going on behind you. And you think, well, if I stay here, I'll fry.
Yeah.
So you probably decide that your appetite for risk has changed, and you think the jumping off the wall is the better option, because the staying put is no longer a sensible option. So circumstances change your appetite. And I try and take that through to boards to think of future scenarios where things might change that would alter their appetite. I think one of the things I find with boards is appetites are too rigid.
Right.
And I think that's something I like to explore with people is, you know, what would make your appetite increase or decrease? How much control do you have over the things that will influence that? Is that getting too esoteric for your audience? I don't know, but
no. This is all philosophically interesting stuff. And do you find a difference between, let's say, a board of a charity, or the board of a privately held company and the board of a PLC? And I'll tell you, I'll try and give you a bit of clarity as to where I'm going with this. You've got different objectives, different obligations as a board member of different types of organisation. But let's say the difference between a private company and a PLC in terms of that forward-looking piece. Is there anything in the point that the kind of share price, which is how most of these boards in PLCs, I believe, are incentivized, is to some extent more forward-looking, whereas in a private company, you're being based on your performance in your last year's accounts, and therefore you're more backward-looking? Or am I sort of jumping too far?
No, you're not. You're not. It's a very good point. I came across this with it depends on how the performances are measured. I mean, in a lot of organizations these days, the shareholders want to see every 3 months some sort of growth or profit or dividend. And there's certainly pressure for short-term performance, and that can sometimes compromise long-term strategic aims. To give you an example, I had a foreign firm where the main board, which was mainly independent directors, were very concerned about shareholder value and preventing investor flight or doing anything that would upset the sentiment, the ESG sentiments and all this sort of thing. Whereas the operational board, the executive, had to get the business running every day and perform and deliver and make things and get things to happen. And sometimes you find with a two hierarchy board, which again is less of a UK issue, more European, where you have 2-tier, you get this friction between, you know, what are we here to do? Are we here to make a profit, or are we here to keep the shareholders happy? And how do we reconcile? They're not always the same thing. Your point about the private company versus the PLC, PLCs do have the eye over the shoulder of share price volatility. Private companies, it depends on the ownership structure. You know, if some things that companies do are a reflection of their ownership structure and who owns them, and I can't go into that in too much detail. Certainly charities obviously have a view on donations and sentiment to keep them going. And if they do something I think one of the major charities did something abroad that was not very clever, and there was a direct correlation between some inappropriate action by one of its executives and a decline in donations,
which makes sense.
So, trying not to name names, but I think people know these sort of people. So yeah, charities are much more mindful of the public sentiment because they draw from a wider base. The PLC, of course, they've got a fairly narrow base of institutional investors, and they are pretty hard nosed. They know what they're looking for. The average private company, they're between a rock and a hard place. They've got they've got regulators and rules that say they must do this, and on the other hand, they've got to keep performing, and they've got to keep growing or turning a profit. No, I'm not really answering that as clearly as perhaps I might, but I don't see an awful lot of difference, but I do see a difference between public and private sector. And professional sector, architects, doctors, surveyors, people who are professionals, lawyers, these are partnerships generally. And there are fears that a senior partner might leave and go to a rival, or that reputation of the firm is wrapped up with the behavior of key individuals, because they're very much a personal service. Risk is very, very behavioral. I mean, people like Christian Hunt would always say, of course it is, but it is a very
who's been on the podcast before as well.
Well, yeah, he's very, and quite rightly so. And says Roger Miles, if you know Roger, they're very behavioural guys. I sort of stray into that a little bit, but a lot of my audiences don't want to get too esoteric. They want to know what do we got to do. So I major on two things. I major on the identifying risk, and not missing it, which is a big theme, and the communication, and being clear what you want your audience to do with that information and what they can do with it.
So what would cause people to miss or misidentify risk then? What are the sort of key factors that lead?
Well, I talk about three different things, which I've done in an article, which we can flag up later if you want. One was the risk is just not recognised. It's just not on the radar. But the area, and the second one is whether it's due to some bias around the boardroom table. And I can go, I'm sure other people can go on a while about cognitive biases, where there's 6 or 6,000. There's lots of cognitive biases. But the thing that I'm quite excited about is what I call risk blindness. And I've identified 6 types, 3 of which are accidental and 3 of which are willful or deliberate. The accidental ones I call conflict, collusion, and commitment, which I won't go into at the moment. But the willful ones are the interesting ones, which I call conviction, culture, and choice, where you find a board will not see something because they believe. I'm trying not to get into politics here, but sometimes risks are just not seen because nobody wants to see them, and that's either because of a philosophy or a culture, or just because that's the way we do things. And it's a blindness that's quite exciting to work with, and it's tough, but you sometimes find that organizations just don't want to go there. And then they have to have a big cultural rethink, really. Risk blindness is something I'm quite interested in, and I think once boards want to explore why they might not see a risk, it's quite interesting, because there's a tendency to say it's on our register, it must be, we've got it covered. And you say, well, what about the ones that aren't on your register? Oh, well, they can't be relevant. Well, why can't they be relevant? And you end up playing sort of devil's advocate until you irritate them so much you get thrown out.
Hopefully they'll at least pay your bill before they throw you out.
Well, it is. I have been invited into a boardroom to be a sort of facilitator or moderator, because everyone had a view on risk and they wanted to pull it together and harmonize it. And you, at the end of the day, you try to, because you're not involved in the politics of it, you try to just say, look, guys, I think you ought to think of it like this, and you have to let them do it.
Yeah.
But again, because of the individuals around the table and the agendas they've got and all the other little biases and politics and stuff, you just have to let them get on with it. But it's sometimes important to say, look, the emperor has no clothes, and if you can't see it, I'm showing you now.
Oh dear, yeah. I think that's a good message for us all to bear in mind, I suppose. So if there are those challenges, then I mean, how do you try to overcome those? Is it through kind of coaching, or what's the best way of? It's a third party expert analysis or something to try. You know, sometimes people will pay more attention to a third party than something internally, for example.
Well, I'd like to think so. I mean, most of the programs I run are with business schools where you are doing this as part of a bigger program. I mean, one I'm running next month is part of a 1 week residential, and I do 2 days on boards and risks. Somebody else does finance and somebody else does human relations or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it normally fits in that kind of program. Yes, there's a case for coaching. It depends on having a very benign CEO or client buying point who says, okay, well, take us through this.
Yeah.
My preference would be to say, right, this is the way I think you ought to be thinking about it. Would you like me to review it in a month or 3 months? Shall I come back in and see what you're doing? I don't want to be too prescriptive. My whole thing is it's trying to create a light bulb moment so that people see things differently.
Yeah.
Then they can go away and act differently. You go back 3 months later or a month later or whatever you need to and look in and look through the window and see what they're doing. If they have moved on, that's fantastic. If they haven't, you just give them some nudges. But what you can't do is say, this is how you must do it, because they've got to buy into it. It's the same with any form of training. They've got to buy into it. Yeah,
you've got to meet people where they are. It's something that, in my world, I sort of grapple with a lot, because the problem that I solve, as you know, around slips and falls, it's a very big problem, but it's a problem that is quite easy to, as you say earlier, just sort of overlook or think you've got it covered, and kind of, we've got it's on the register and we're dealing with it, and perhaps you're not actually doing as good a job as you can. So, but people don't want to hear that they're doing a bad job. They want to hear that perhaps there's a different way, or so it's kind of approaching it in a sort of softer way, meeting people where they're at, so they're open to listening and having those light bulb moments.
What I like to be invited to do, or it doesn't happen very often, is an organisation say, will you please have a look at our risk register? And you'll see a list of about 60 or 70 risks. You'll see 10 or 15 high risks or strategic risks or principal risks. And actually investigate whether it's fit for purpose. Because sometimes this is a list of A, things that have been thought of, and B, for which some individual is tasked with doing something about. And I've seen many where you say, well, can this person actually affect any change? Well, not really. All they can do is press the button and ring the alarm bell. They can't actually do anything. So you actually take them through fitness for purpose. And what I've found with a lot of organizations, certainly with schools and institutions, is they've got a risk register. The auditors come and say, tick the box, they've got a risk register, but they don't interrogate it for its sense and its value and its operational practical use. And I think that is important. There's one thing, say, if any of people listening to this can say, look, I'm happily come in, interrogate their, I've done it with a local council in London, go in and look at the risk register and say, look, okay, you've got a lovely lot of this set of things here, but what happens if that happens? And what happens? Can they really do anything about that? What can they do? And sometimes they're just documents for compliance, and they're not really active. I mean, a lot of the times I say, well, are you trying to just identify a risk here because that's what your map does? To what extent can you actually move from identifying it to managing it and reducing it? And I do try and give organizations some tools and ways of thinking about things and stopping and looking at it from just an insurance point of view, which is probability and severity, and looking at how they can actually increase their control and managing it. Because I think a lot of the mapping of risks comes out of insurance, actually.
Yeah.
And it's very good for costing a risk, but it's not very good for reducing it.
Yeah.
And I try and help people reduce risk. Anyway, sorry.
I say stop insuring with an I, start ensuring with an E. In other words,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
manage and mitigate and get on top of stuff rather than just sort of passing the risk over to someone else and paying a premium for that.
Well, exactly. And I've seen some very pretty risk maps with lots of, 25 box matrix, not a 9 box, but a 25 box matrix. And you focus on the red ones and you actually say, what are you doing about reducing that? Can you move that red into an amber or green? Well, not really. It's always going to be there. Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, it's just there. And you start thinking, well, really, you would have built in some resilience to deal with that. No good just saying that's the way it is. That's the market.
There's always things you can do to control.
Well, exactly.
Risks, yeah.
I'm very careful about getting into the control mindset because, as I say, there are a lot of people who do it better than I do. I try and keep out of the control mindset because I'm dealing with people at the level where they should be thinking higher than control. They should be thinking, what is our appetite? And the control is done by the risk management team, whereas the board is a governance thing, looking for what risks we should take. But the control side often does need a sort of nudge.
No, that's certainly my experience as well. And in terms of the communication piece, then, have you got any great acronyms or
Well, I tell you what I have done. I used to run a course at the stock exchange in London because for startups, companies that were going to launch and have an IPO and get into the market. And of course, they were trained. They've been trained on how to talk about risk. And of course, the people who came and talked about risk were accountants and lawyers and people who say, well, you've got to talk about this. And of course, the story coming out was all about compliance and controls. And I said, well, what about your messages to investors? Investors don't want to know that they want to know the risk that is attractive to them.
Where it's going and how they can benefit.
They want to see risk as an investment opportunity. They don't want to see risk as just something you've kept the regulator happy with or you've got under control. So I developed this story about the sort of duality of the message. It's the message you've got to give to regulators is one thing, but the message you give to investors is very different. And a lot of companies don't know how to turn their risk message around. Okay. It's the message for one lot is very different to the message for the other lot. And it's a selling message, really. You're selling risk as something that you want to buy. And a lot of IPOs fail because the wrong investors jump in and buy something. They buy it because they can do a quick flip on it, or they can, whatever they can do. They're not buying for the long term. So what I was saying to people is, if you're looking for investors, find out that they buy into your company for what it is, rather than it's just a share price they can flip, and whether or not they will stay for the long term. How long they're going to be in with it, and what you don't want to do is have the wrong kind of investor. And again, it's all a matter of how you explain risk.
Yeah.
So again, that's one example of talking risk to the right audience. And there's an assumption that a lot of risk is the negative side, but actually the upside of risk has got to be expressed differently.
What would you say are the key sort of benefits or outcomes then of kind of getting this right? So you go on this journey with a board, and how would they explain the key outcomes that they would achieve and see as positive benefits of going through this?
Well, I would like to think, based on the identify, manage, communicate trilogy or triple alliance thing, they would learn to identify risks that somebody like myself has come in and said, why aren't you looking at that as a risk? Because they are focused inwards. A lot of boards are very focused on the figures of the last quarter, meeting their next quarter's targets, and operational issues. They're very operational.
Yeah.
And quite often, even if they've got a head of strategy or somebody, their long-term view is very clouded by the short-term performance goals, which are understandable. So hopefully the identifying risks gives them a chance to see things, both opportunity and threat, further ahead, and do more strategic planning, which is why scenario planning can be very good, because with scenario planning, you identify scenarios that are unattractive and you want to avoid, and you identify scenarios that are attractive and you want to move the business towards benefiting from them. So, it's not airy-fairy long-range stuff, but you can bolt it down and start to define. And then when the board is doorstepped by the media, they can speak confidently about the future strategy and not just say, "Oh, that's not what I do." Like risk. "Oh, I don't do risk." So the identification, I think, is important, and the communication is very important. Again, a lot of organizations say, "Well, we've got a head of comms, or we've got a public affairs department, or we've got an external relations guy." It's not just leaving it to somebody else. If you're on the board, you should be able, if you're doorstep for somebody to say, "Okay, yes, I do know our strategy, and I can explain it, and I believe in it." This is what our risks are. We know their risks, and we review them regularly, and we adapt. And one of the most difficult things I had was a mining company,
right?
Who said, "How do I talk about tolerance? Because there are deaths in our industry. You can say we go for 0 tolerance and 100% safety, but anybody who invests in us knows that." Same with offshore oil and anything that's extractive. There are dangers in it, and it's a very difficult thing to talk about appetite and tolerance in some dangerous industries. But you have to find a language. So how you communicate risk in areas. I mean, I recently ran a case study of Rio Tinto and their thing in Australia, where they blew up some rather important mines and bits of archaeological heritage, which everyone knows about. But I ran it as a reputation risk case study, but it speaks volumes to how the board is often out of touch with what's happening at the ground level. And that's one of the things I want to try and do with boards, is get them to be more in touch with what's happening in their operation.
Because I think that there's always that chance that the communication coming from the board ends up being a series of platitudes versus what's actually happening in the real world on the shop floor, for want of a better term, isn't there?
Exactly. And I think if this helps the board think more about what goes on operationally, it's not a bad thing. I mean, you see these awful statistics coming out about boardroom pay in the last year versus average pay, and this whole cost of living thing. It is scary. I mean, if you're sitting on a board and you're taking home a fat salary, then you've got to be confident that you're worth it. You can't just sit there and like L'Oreal and say, "Because I'm worth it." You've got to say, actually, are you really worth it? And shouldn't some of that go to the workers or whatever? But I think it can create a better sense of awareness of, I hate to use the word purpose because it gets overused, but we can go into that. But it reminds people of boards of the purpose of the business, and I suppose that's kind of useful. Where
you're going, what your values are.
Well, exactly. I mean, I've often seen a lot of organizations and looked at their mission statement and said, "What do you mean?" And you go around the boardroom and nobody can really explain the mission statement. It's been developed by a comms guy. It's not really. It's just to put on the brochure,
which is dangerous, because then you're not living and breathing it, and
exactly.
Then you're misaligned, and that's when issues will occur.
I think comms risk and its various levels is very interesting. In politics, it's very interesting, but in big firms, it's very interesting as well. There's been a lot of talk. I mean, I used to run some courses in the last couple of years on ESG, you've got ESG, what investors mean by it, and ESG, what a company needs to do, and where's it focused, and what are investors, E people or S people or G people? What are they really interested in? I had a retailer who was very, very, very big retailer. very keen on its consumer story about its packaging and its freshness of product and all this kind of thing. But it let itself down by the fact that its women on the tills were paid less than the men on the tills.
Oh, right, yeah.
And all of a sudden, once this comes out, that's your S, isn't it? It's not so good. So your E might be good, but your S isn't, this kind of thing. So you end up saying, well, let's just have a look at what you're doing. But that strays into other stuff. I mean, that's ESG risk, which in itself is quite an interesting area to get into with boards because they're not always comfortable with it.
No,
it's come through from the investor relations director and shareholders, and he's saying, look, what are we going to do about this? And then it feeds through to, well, how's the board? What are we doing? What are our practices? How sustainable are we?
Then you'll be on the back foot because you're being reactive rather than proactive.
Well, what I try and do with that program is say, okay, let's look at what we mean by sustainability in our business. And how does sustainability and responsibility play out in our workplace? Could we be doing things differently? There's a tendency with some boards is to be quite fixed on their mindset. Well, this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. Yeah. And you say, well, actually, really to be sustainable, you need to be looking at that. I remember thinking back to the oil companies when BP, before they had the Macondo oil crisis, 2010. I think it was 2010. It's a long time ago. Yeah. They tried to do this beyond petroleum because they realised that if you're talking sustainability, if you're a fossil fuel business, it's hypocritical. So you've got to find how you build your value. And I think sometimes with boards, coming at it from a risk aspect is quite an interesting way of doing it, because you're not actually criticizing strategy, but you are allowing it to be questioned. Yeah, because strategy and risk both happen in the future, and there are no rights and wrongs. And one of the things somebody said to me about predicting the future, you're either lucky or you're wrong.
That's a good way of putting it. That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, I like that. Good stuff. Well, Garry, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed it. Where could people go to learn more? I know you've got some videos on your website and you're very active on LinkedIn.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to take inquiries through the website, which I'm sure you've got a logo of it somewhere, and if not,
we can sort that out.
As I say, it's primarily talking about reputation, so tend to look at organizations which have a worry either with the press or investors or some stakeholder group that's causing them grief. But I'm also quite interested in taking this story through to board programs, not necessarily business schools, but executive coaching area. I don't call myself a coach because too many people do. Yes. And the same as I don't call myself a consultant because too many people do. But I try to help boards work through these problems. And if anyone generally wants to inquire, I'm happy to have a chat. I'm not trying to sell a particular product. Quite happy to be advisory. Yeah. So yeah, get in touch and we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Good stuff. Well, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Learnt lots to ponder about and think through in the future as well. And that's the whole idea of the podcast. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next week for another episode.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.